So welcome participants to our regular Innovative Business Advisors Thursday afternoon webinar. Um, Interesting topic today. We're really going to focus very heavily on the CARES Act and specifically the Payroll Protection Program. And that is really the main topic we will be addressing today. So the meeting may be shorter than normal today. We'll begin with only two panelists are myself and Steve Denny. Steve will go ahead and do a presentation related to updates. And as many of you probably are aware, there's a fair amount going on right now and things we need to think about as we move into the end of the year. So with that said, well, before I turn it over to you, Steve, though, one thing I do want to point out is if you'll notice in the portal for Zoom, there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, maybe at the top of your screen. But I want to encourage everyone to use that Q&A box to enter any questions you have as Steve goes through the presentation and as we move into the discussion. And certainly your Q&A, your questions will determine the length of this session today. I know that Steve's presentation is somewhat brief today, and then we'll move into the Q&A and we'll stop when we exhaust all of the questions. So Steve, with that said, the floor is yours.
Excellent, Marquita. Thank you very much. And as always, thank you so much for working with us on Thursday afternoon to put these programs on. It's very much appreciated. I'm going to share my screen here and click this other button over here, and hopefully we will get to the presentation. So Marquita, can you see it okay on your side?
Yes, perfect. So
Excellent.
I'm only seeing the presentation, not the full PowerPoints. It looks good.
All right, very good. Well, we have had a lot of inquiry from regular attendees and many in our communities that have asked us for a more comprehensive update on the PPP. There hasn't been a lot of action that's taken place over the last few months, and thus we've taken the opportunity to bring in invited guests and hopefully provide some content and information that was helpful for our audience. But today, in response to the audience requests, we're going to dive in specifically to everything that's happened in the PPP. And there have been a couple of things that are interesting changes to the program. So we'll talk a little bit about PPP updates, and then we'll talk a lot about the PPP forgiveness application process. In addition to the discussion today on the webinar, on the replay, we've got all of the various forms. We're going to talk about those today, and we will post all of the forms and all of the instruction documents and a couple of nice FAQ documents that the SBA has put together on the Paycheck Protection Program. So you can go to our YouTube channel tomorrow and view the replay if you'd like, and certainly download all the supporting materials. So it'll all be there for your convenience. I want to start with probably the worst news of all. Huge caution. The federal judge ordered the SBA to release the names of all PPP borrowers and their precise loan amounts. So this is really significant. Not only did they do it for the PPP, they're requiring the SBA to also release the names and amounts of anybody that received the economic injury disaster loans as well as part of this whole pandemic. So a federal judge has ordered them to do this a few weeks ago. Actually, this week the SBA complied, and they have got various tables on their website that provide the borrowers' names and the details of their loans on their websites. What's really unique and significant about this, everybody knows the SBA has been around since the end of World War II, and you know they generally do about $30 billion a year in loan activity, and they have never before been required to provide loan activity details. So if you are an SBA borrower, which is a primary way that people buy and sell and start businesses and buy real estate and assets, equipment and so forth associated with businesses, the Small Business Administration has been able to, in the past, protect all of your loan information. But folks, the doors are now open on all of that. What we think may happen is there are probably going to be folks that are pulling down those lists and may start reaching out to you to offer you potentially services to do various things regarding your business and your loan. So if you wonder where that renewed interest in you and your company comes from, it may well come from the fact that the SBA is forced to release this. I would tell you that I have composed a letter to our Congress people in our particular jurisdiction. I'm just going to voice my strong opinion that I don't think that this should have had to take place, and I hope that Congress will take some action to protect borrowers in this regard. I view it as a privacy issue myself, so I'll get off my soapbox on that. But I just wanted to say we are really not political, as you may know from participating in our webinars. But if you have a strong opinion one way or the other, now would be a great time to engage with your congressional leaders and let them know how you feel about this. So one of the reasons that's really important is there are about 5.2 million loans that were issued to businesses throughout the United States as part of the Paycheck Protection Program. So that if you really think about it, that's, somewhere between 1 in 5 and 1 in 6 of all businesses in the country received a loan under one of these programs. That's a huge amount of people. There was $525 billion in total loan amount. And as a borrower, you had to report the number of employees you had, and the SBA added all that up, and there were over 51 million employees that were covered under the Paycheck Protection loans. So pretty staggering numbers out there. I also just wanted to highlight that the SBA did begin processing the forgiveness applications on October 2nd. So we've heard from many banks. Some are accepting applications and processing them. Some are asking people to continue to wait. It's all depending upon which particular lender you had in that particular time. So we just wanted to take a minute and review the program as a whole. These were lender originated, but SBA guaranteed and lender service loans. So a relatively unique program that had never been done before in U.S. history, and certainly was put together in face of the pandemic. As many of you know, Innovative Business Advisors was honored to have been in attendance in some of the congressional conference calls regarding this program before it was passed. And, thinking back to that period in early March and late March during those calls, everybody at the time thought that this pandemic may be with us for as long as 3 months. So, nobody, I don't think, ever envisioned that we'd be sitting here 9 months later, with some form of a second wave going on. And as a result of that, there is certainly a whole new renewed interest on Capitol Hill. And Marquita and I were just talking about the potential legislation that is going back and forth on Capitol Hill right now. We were a part of a conference call with several congressional leaders about midday today that was talking about the various viewpoints on that the various constituents have about this program, and that the lawmakers have about it. So looks highly likely that there will be a fourth tranche of some form that comes out regarding the COVID aid, and this $900 billion bill that you may have been reading about or hearing about in the news media the last few days does contain a renewed PPP loan program. So if that $900 billion package ends up becoming law, looks like the PPP program may come back. So just to give a quick overview, all about lender originated, SBA guaranteed, lender serviced. These were forgivable loans, but boy, are they great loans. 1% annual interest rate, simple interest loans. They had no prepayment penalty, and they had no recourse. So, you were not securing this loan by sending over, titles to your equipment, your business, your real estate, anything like that. And there were no fees associated with it. So it was, again, just whatever the loan amount was and the simple interest. Originally, when they came out, they deferred payments for 6 months because, if everybody will remember, there was an anticipated usage time of 8 weeks. was expected you'd use that money over an 8-week period of time and then have another 4 months before the payments began to apply. Now they've extended that to 10 months beyond what has now become a 24-week deferment period. So significant extension that's happened in a couple of the iterations of the law. And then originally they were 2-year loans, and they extended those up to 5-year loans. So been a lot of changes in the PPP, as most folks are aware of. Let me give you a couple of major updates that have happened in the last 60 days. So first and foremost, the SBA came out with change of ownership for PPP borrowers provisions. Those of you that have been with us on these webinars for a long time, and Marquita certainly remembers this, we had deals that were in place when the pandemic hit, and we had deals that were scheduled to close in March and April and May, and many of those got delayed because of the pandemic and because of the fact that we had some of the participants in those deals had PPP loans. It was quite an interesting time trying to transfer businesses from one party to another. We had the banks that didn't really know how to handle it. We certainly had no experience handling it. The various attorneys and advisors in the programs and in the transactions had no experience with it. And the SBA didn't know what to do either. The law never contemplated that a borrower might transfer ownership in their business during that period of time. So it was really a quite confusing period of time, and we got a lot of deals done, but and I will tell you that they happened in different ways. I don't think there were any two that were the same, at least for us, but they did get done, and now the SBA has finally come out with some strong guidance in that regard. So first and foremost, how do you define a transfer? Well, this particular rule talks about if there is a 20% or more stock or ownership interest transfer in the business, transfer or sale. So remember that there are two primary forms of transaction. One would be an ownership interest or a share sale. The second would be an asset sale. So the SBA came in and said if more than 50% of the assets are sold or transferred in a business. So basically that encompasses almost any type of transaction that could take place. Somewhat rare, but the other one is where two entities merge together. It might be a tax exempt type of a transaction, but if there is a merger of two entities, what happens then to one or more of those that has a PPP loan outstanding? So the SBA has finally ruled on this and come out and said the following: the borrower is still responsible for all compliance with any of the terms of the SBA PPP program loan. They are responsible for the performance under that loan. They're responsible for any of the certifications that needed to be made under that loan, and they're responsible for all of the documentation that must be done under that loan. So think about this for a minute. If you're a business owner and you had a PPP loan and you had a deal to sell or wanted to sell your business to somebody, as the business owner, your ultimate goal is to walk away from the sale table getting paid in full and not having any further obligation with that business. But now, if you had a PPP loan that was in place when that sale or transfer took place, you are going to continue to have responsibilities regarding that PPP loan. And you, not the new owner, is responsible for any of the documentation, certifications, and compliance requirements that are necessary to get that loan serviced and potentially forgiven. So puts a new burden on sellers. The other thing that they've added here, which is very significant, is the SBA must be notified within 5 days of any transaction. So this puts an onus back on the borrower to make sure that they make those notifications. This is a new rule, and just want to make sure everybody's aware of that. We've seen a huge amount of renewed interest in people buying and selling businesses over the last 3 months. And if this is something that you're thinking about or contemplating, you need to be well acquainted with this new provision. So let me move on. We kind of previewed earlier the deferral period for PPP borrowers. So there was a change that took place on October 7th. And originally, the deferral period went on for 6 months. This says 6 months after the loan forgiveness period, but it's actually after the covered period. So the deferral, you had a covered period of time where you could use the money, and then you had 6 months following that use of the money to actually not have to make payments on that. So remember, that covered period was originally 8 weeks when the PPP loan first started, and if you were in the second or third tranche and then maybe got a change from your lender, they extended that period for up to 24 weeks. So technically, you had the use of the money, and then you had 6 months after the use of the money during that covered period before you had to go out and begin making repayments, if you will. Now what they've done is through what's known as the Flexibility Act, which is one of the change notices that have come out since the CARES Act, they have changed that deferral period for all payments, whether it's principal, interest, or fees. And of course, there can't be any fees with these loans, but they've extended that to 10 months after the end of the borrower's loan period. So, you know, if you were, for example, received a loan, let's say you received a PPP loan in June, you were in the second wave of the loans, if you will. During that period of time, you may have been given up to 24 weeks to use the PPP funds, and then you had to begin making payments on that loan 6 months after that 24-week period. Now they've extended that to 10 months after that covered period. So pretty significant expansion there. One other very interesting rule change that's actually happened. And this is going to be most impactful for PPP borrowers. If your PPP loan was $50,000 or less, you as a borrower are now exempt for reduction in the potential forgiveness amount of that loan if in fact you did or did not reduce your full-time employees, or you provided any reduction in the salary or wages of your full-time employees. So we're going to talk in a minute about the whole forgiveness application process. But if you had a loan of $50,000 or less, there is a whole section of the forgiveness application where you've got to do some calculations to determine, did you reduce your full-time employees or their pay rates by 25% or more? Well, for those borrowers that received loans of $50,000 or less, they are now exempt from that whole process, which really makes the PPP loan forgiveness application for these particular borrowers very simple. It's actually as simple as the original application was. It's literally fill in a few boxes, check all the certifications, and sign your name. And you still have to provide some documentation to support it, and we'll go through that in a minute, but it's a much, much easier application form. And the SBA now calls that application form 3508S. So again, we'll have all of the various forms, and in just a minute, I'm going to cover each of those with you in detail, and we'll have all of those attached to this webinar. So you won't have to worry about going and hunting for them. You can just get them right off our site. So those are some of the big rule changes. Something very significant has happened if you were one of the 30,000 or so borrowers that received a large PPP loan, and the large loans were in amounts of $2 million or more. So as I know, we've all had a lot of time at home. Probably a lot of folks have been paying more attention to the news than they had in times past. And there's been a lot of talk about, you know, fraud and taking advantage of the system, and congressional leaders are very interested in making sure that nobody's being able to take advantage. So one of the things that we certainly saw early was there were a couple of companies that were called out because they were very large companies that took advantage of this and really didn't need it. And they did give the money back. But congressional leaders now have created a new, well, I should say not congressional leaders, I misspoke. Actually, the SBA, and I think this is in response to pressure they've received from congressional leaders, now have a new form. It's called a Loan Necessity Questionnaire. So I thought it was significant to pull this up. The administrator, Jovita Carranza, said using this questionnaire helps ensure that the SBA is monitoring the program integrity and ensuring that the program works as intended. And certainly we all want to make sure that the program maintains its integrity and works as it was intended, right? So what they've done is, if you're a borrower and you've received more than $2 million in the PPP loans, and there are about 30,000 companies that receive loans of $2 million or more, you're now going to get this new SBA form 3509 if you're a for-profit entity, or 3510 if you're a not-for-profit entity. You're going to be receiving that form from your lender. And basically, it's going to ask you a series of questions where you're going to make certifications that you actually applied with the appropriate intent, used the money with the appropriate intent, and then had to provide some documentations along that lines to make sure you weren't taking advantage of the program. And again, the forms are going to come from your lender, and then you've got to turn that back to the lender within 10 days. So if you are a borrower that fits within these constraints, it's a short timeline on that.
Hey, Steve.
Yes, ma'am.
On these specific scenarios where you're talking about the deadlines being, say, 10 days, 5 days, whatever, are we talking about calendar days or business days?
I would expect business days. Yeah, think in terms of business days for that. Yeah. Yeah, because this form is going to come from your lender. So I also wanted to put on here, on the form itself, it says failure to complete the form and provide the required supporting documents may result in the SBA's determination that you were ineligible for either the PPP loan, the PPP loan amount, or any forgiveness amount claimed. And SBA may seek repayment of the loan or pursue other available remedies. Remember, it was a criminal issue if you certified and that certification was found to be fraudulent. So that's the big hook that they're now putting in place. So want to make sure everybody's aware of that. This has not gotten a huge amount of press out there. I haven't seen it in a lot of press on this in the areas that I follow, and some of the people that I've talked with about this certainly aren't aware of it. I think the larger borrowers and the banks are aware of it, so hopefully that this is getting out there. Now, let me switch gears over to the PPP forgiveness applications. So there are really 3 forgiveness applications, and we've got this chart here. I hope it's simple enough for everybody. The 3 application forms are the 3508S, the 3508EZ, the 3508, which is considered the long form, if you will, and then that questionnaire is called the 3509 and 3510. So who can use these forms? Well, first off, if you had a PPP loan that was $50,000 or less, you can use the 3508 form, which you want to use. It's very, very simple. It's as simple as the application, very easy form to fill out. Take you, if it takes you 5 minutes, I would say that's a long time, and you're going to have to provide a little bit of documentation to it. You don't have to do any calculations whatsoever. It's simply check a few boxes, put in a couple of pieces of data, and sign it, and you're gone. One thing that I don't think is well understood in the discussions that we're having with folks is the forgiveness application deadlines. So people confuse the forgiveness application deadline with the deferment period. So the deferment period is that time between the covered period, i.e. the use of the funds, and when you have to start making payments on the loan, right? But the forgiveness application deadline is really different. You can submit the forgiveness application anytime before your loan matures. Okay, so you could literally go up to the day before your loan matures and provide the forgiveness application at that period of time. The one thing is you will have been making payments on your loan during that period of time, right? So there is a lot of confusion, I think, out there about, is there a deadline to provide forgiveness application? And there is, but the deadline is the day before your loan is completely due and payable. All the forms require supporting documentations. So if you're claiming that you used the funds, and remember, 60% or more of the funds from the loan had to be used for payroll purposes in order to be considered for forgiveness. If you used funds and want some or all of those funds forgiven, you have to provide some supporting documentation with your forgiveness application. And that applies across the board. So for the 3508S, the easiest form, if you got 50,000 or less, strongly encourage you to use it. It's really easy. Anybody can do it. There are no calculations required, but you will have to have a couple of attachments with your form when you submit it to your lender. And I put this little note in here. Remember, of the 5.2 million businesses that receive PPP loans, a little more than 3.5 million of those had these small loans. So the vast majority of the loans, I think the SBA hopes that those borrowers will use this form and have a very expedited forgiveness application. If you receive more than 50,000, you automatically have to look at potentially then the EZ form. Now the 3508 EZ is actually a very easy form when it's compared to the 3508, the regular long form, but it does require a little bit of calculations. So if your balance was more than 50,000 and you were self-employed and you didn't have any employees, or you didn't reduce the wages or number of your employees by more than 25%, you can use the EZ form. And there is some calculations that are required. There's a couple of tables that you got to fill out. Relatively easy to do. And again, the same forgiveness application applies, and you will have to provide the supporting documentations. If this is one of those forms where you want to provide, payroll data and other expense data, you're probably going to have to go to the 3508 EZ. If those things don't apply to you, regardless of the size of your loan, if your loan was bigger than 50,000, but you can't meet the qualifications for the EZ, you have to use the long form. And the long form, including all the instructions, is about 11 pages. There is the Schedule A worksheets that are included in it, and you will have to go through all the various calculations. It is a little more complicated. It will take you some time. You got to have your ducks in a row. You got to have all the information together. It will ask you for a lot more information than the other two forms do. So you're going to need to have individual employee information that you're going to put in the tables. But it is not all that difficult. It'll just take a concerted effort. And then finally, if you receive more than 2 million, you're also going to have to do that questionnaire. So hopefully this table will be simple enough that it can give you some general guidance about which particular form should I use. One thing I will tell you is if, as a PPP borrower, if you received 50,000 or less, it is incredibly simple. You can do this by yourself. You can do this by yourself with your bookkeeper, with your accountant, with your payroll provider, or with your spouse or other trusted advisor. It is not a difficult forgiveness application. So please don't let anybody scare you into thinking that you've got to have some real specialized talent to help you get these applications done properly. You really don't. The EZ application is very, very simple as well, and I think any business owner can handle that also. The 3508 is a little bit more complicated. If you need to file the 3508, I would definitely encourage you to talk with your accountant or bookkeeper and see whether or not you're going to need outside help in those areas. So hopefully that'll provide some level of help and assistance. Next, I want to move on to the IRS. Who can ever forget the IRS? They always want to weigh in and talk to us about their view about this as well. So IRS has come up with Rule 51. And the IRS is basically doubling down on the fact that, remember, if you received a PPP loan and you received forgiveness for some or all of that loan, or you have a reasonable expectation that you will receive forgiveness of some or more of that loan, you cannot claim deductions on your tax return for those expenses that you actually were able to claim for the forgiveness application on your PPP loan. So let's give a quick example. Let's say that you're a business that has $100,000 a year in payroll, just to use simple numbers. And you could use 2.5 months of your payroll for your PPP loan, right? And let's say, for the sake of example, that that amounted to about $30,000. So you got a PPP loan for $30,000, right? And you did everything that was required. You used the funds as they were prescribed, and you provided the forgiveness application in as soon as you finished using the funds, and your lender and the SBA forgave your loan balance in its entirety. So now you basically got $30,000 of non-repayable loan benefit to your company. Well, when you claim your taxes for this year, instead of claiming the full $100,000 payroll amount that your business incurred, you have to reduce that amount by the $30,000 that you got in free loan, if you will, under the PPP. Thus, your payroll expense on your tax return is going to go down from normally what it would have been $100,000 to $70,000. Well, if the rest of your business wasn't severely affected, that may significantly inflate the profitability that your business had this year. So pay attention to that, because your business profits may go up as a result of the PPP loans. However, if you were in the opposite side where you were severely affected, it may not have any effect to you at all. But the thing here is you can't double dip. So you can't get the free use of the PPP money and also claim those expenses on your tax return. And that's what the IRS is now going out of its way to remind all of us as taxpayers that is the case. So
Steve, this is Marquita, and you and I talked about this before we came on, and I'm going to just sit here and protest one more time. Because there is a subtle difference here. If you furloughed your employees but continued to pay them while they were furloughed, I feel you were being a good citizen by not having those people claim unemployment, but your business got no beneficial use of those people's work time. On the other hand, if the people truly were still on board and working, and you use them, it makes all the sense in the world to me that you should not be able to double dip. So that's my protest for the day. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, and I think if your business had to close, or if you didn't have work for your employees to do, and your business, your revenues of your business were off significantly, this may not have much of any effect on you. But if your business, if you were an essential business and you were able to use the PPP to cover your payroll expenses and some other miscellaneous business expenses for a period of time, it is going to artificially inflate your profits. We've seen this already in businesses. As Marquita well knows, we've seen it already. And when that occurs, you're going to end up with a larger tax bill than you normally would have. So be aware that you are going to need to make those additional deductions, and your accountants are going to feast on this as well. They're going to have to do some additional calculations to make sure that everything's right. So potentially your tax prep bill may even go up as well.
Yeah. Let's look at one question that just popped up as you put this chart up regarding the IRS Rule 51. What if your PPP loan is not forgiven until 2021? Where's the impact here? I'm starting to guess, Steve, that many businesses, if they have not already applied for and gotten forgiveness, that they may have to do revised tax returns at some point during the year. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. I think that could be an impact. I didn't copy in the full extent of the law. You can Google this IRS rule and pull the full thing down. It's multiple pages, but there is a section in there where they talk about reasonable expectation of forgiveness. So the IRS recognizes that you may have had to the end of the year to use those funds, and then, obviously you would be applying for forgiveness in the next tax year. But if you have a reasonable expectation that those funds are going to be forgiven, then you should be claiming that on your tax returns, is the way the IRS sees it.
For 2020.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's going to keep the bookkeepers and the tax professionals really busy this year, doing lots of extra calculations to make sure that they've got their clients well covered. So that's pretty much what I've got for you today. I think that brings everybody up to speed. Potentially next week, let's keep our fingers crossed and say our prayers tonight. Hopefully there will be some additional help. I think, Marquita, you and I well know the small business community still needs help. There's been a tremendous amount of struggling going on, particularly with various politicians in various areas closing down businesses and closing down gatherings and so forth, and other areas where they're not doing that. So I think the experience has been very, very spotty.
Good. So let's kind of chat about some of the questions that are coming in now, or comments really more than questions. It's only 3:38 right now, and we have one comment or question queued up. I'm going to encourage everyone who's on the call, if you have any comments, questions, or whatever, go ahead and type them in the Q&A box. But I'll share with you, Steve, that one person who actually is logged in as anonymous recommended or is suggesting that perhaps this will be the year that having to do an extension to the tax return may be needed until this all works itself out.
Yeah, you can get it. Remember, you can get the automatic extension, right?
Yeah. Rather than filing and having to correct, because there's so much that could potentially. I mean, we're December. What is today? December 3rd.
Yes.
I mean, we're close to close of the year, and what is the extension into January? We have until about the 17th or 18th of January to close the books.
I think that's right.
Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's right.
So with that said, I mean, we really only have a matter of weeks here to get this all sorted out as we go into the filing for the 2020 tax year. So it's going to be interesting. I'd be curious to hear an accountant's input on that as they begin to think and plan for what their tax season will be, and who knows if it will be in April. I mean, if the pandemic is still raging as it was last year, we may get an overall extension beyond April 15th. No,
could well be, because we'll certainly be if the news media's reports are accurate, it sounds like we'll be fully involved in a vaccine process through that. What I saw this morning was healthcare workers first, nursing home and elderly kind of second, and then kind of general population vaccinations beginning to take place March, April through the June period is what the CDC released this morning. So be interesting to see how it all shakes out. But I think we're all certainly weary of this and would like to get back to some semblance of normal, and couldn't happen fast enough.
Well, Steve, I don't see any additional questions popping right now, so I'm going to start the wind down process right now. And again, thank you, Steve, for this update. For me, personally, it's really interesting, and I've been throwing questions your way. But with that said, I'm going to turn it over to you, give you an opportunity to make any last comments. I want to remind all of our participants that a recording of this webinar will be available on our YouTube channel, along with a variety of documents that Steve mentioned. And Steve, you might recap those docs again when you do your closing comments. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Marquita. And again, thank you very much for spending Thursday with me. It's an interesting process. God, who would ever dream 9 months ago that we'd be talking about this process? Well, it is amazing. There are 3 primary forgiveness application forms. Your lender is probably sending those forms to you. I've also heard of some lenders that are developing their own, which is generally a form that follows one of the SBA suggested forms. So there could be certainly much more than that. We'll have the 3 forms and the 3 instruction sheets, and then the SBA released a nice information overview document and a whole set of frequently asked questions. And we'll put those along with the recording of this webinar on our YouTube site and make sure that those are all available for our participants. Marquita, as you're also aware, we're booking featured panelists into the future, and we will have some accounting professionals come on and do this with us, some bankers and some other professionals. We've been trying to get some SBA folks on as well, and we may see more of that in the future. So tune in, and we'll look forward to seeing you guys on future weekly webinars. And if there is other information that you as a listener would like to have us bring to this particular forum on a weekly basis, we would be honored to take your suggestions. And that's frankly where this week came from. We heard from a lot of our listeners that we hadn't done a relatively comprehensive update in several weeks, and they wanted to hear more about the forgiveness application. So we're here for you. So let us know what would benefit you. And we thank you very much for paying attention to Marquita and I every Thursday afternoon.